I think of gratitude as an awareness. It's a frame of mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a way of seeing. You have to be conscious of it. You have to deliberately choose those kinds of things. And I think as a photographer, a good photographer is someone who notices things that others might not. You say, hey, I'm going to direct your attention to this important element. It's the same, noticing, paying attention, being deliberate, and being grateful is noticing, paying attention, being deliberate, and focusing on a certain thing.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. I am your host, Randy Sparks, and today we have a dynamite and funny as can be guest who has, of course, the best haircut that they make, the best in the business, and a little bit of scruff. I let some of this come in for you.
All right.
But
Looks good.
Yeah, welcome Justine Hackworth to the show. I'm so happy you could be here with us.
Thanks, Randy. I'm glad to be here. Really, this was so cool of you to invite me.
Well, let me tell everyone a little bit about Justine. So over the last, I don't know, maybe I met you 8 or 10 years ago the first time. We've really crossed paths a few times over the years, but have had wonderful conversations along the way. And the reason I invited Justine to be here, I'm just going to set the expectation super high.
Oh, no.
Is, you know, when you talk to a person and after that conversation, when you leave, you left feeling like you were the most interesting person in the room, right? That's how Justine makes me feel.
Well, it's easy because you are so interesting.
Well, I will take that compliment. You see, proving it. So Justine is a photographer, and that's how I first met him. Is he shot me with his camera? Thank goodness. And one of the things that I imagine we're going to talk about is what Justine sees and what's the experience like. Because when Justine photographs people, from my experience, it actually is an experience and it's a conversation. And this should all come out. But Justine,
Yes.
what is getting you excited this morning?
Well, being here for sure. I've been looking forward to this. It's nice to see you. And then just in general, you mean? Just other things? On my way here, I was thinking, I've got some trips planned that I'm pretty excited about. I have a wedding in Chattanooga, and I'm going to go to Toronto, and we're going to Idaho for this family vacation spot we go to every year. So those are all coming up really soon. I'm pretty stoked about that.
Okay, so you've got these trips. You said one of them's a wedding in Chattanooga. Is this a wedding of like a buddy, or is this work?
I've never met them. It's work. I've never met them, and I'm going out there to shoot it.
Okay, well, tell me about that, because you're going to Chattanooga to shoot a wedding. How often are you traveling to destination jobs?
You know, since COVID, not as much, but before COVID, I would say at least 30% of the weddings I shot were out of state. So if I'm traveling for work, it's usually for a wedding. And then every once in a while, I'll get an odd job that's out of state, but not wedding related. But most of the time it's weddings. And so let's see, this year I probably will have 4 or 5 out of state weddings.
And when you travel like that, do you make is it Justine hops on the plane and gets out there and then comes back to the family? Or is it like a family affair and you guys go and make a vacation of it?
Well, a couple months ago, we went to a wedding in Arizona. I took the whole family. We drove out there and we took the whole family and stuck around a few days after. Last year, I had a wedding in Hawaii, and Amy came with me. My wife came with me. But a lot of times it's been just me. But I think that we have older kids now, so I'm hoping that Amy will come along more often.
Okay.
But it's mostly been me.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to kind of rewind a little bit
and
go back and say, when I've sat with you in the studio, and we've spent 45 minutes, an hour plus with each other in your studio, just in downtown Provo, and the natural light coming in through the one window, and you're just walking around, it almost feels like I'm not being photographed.
Yeah.
Because you and I are having a conversation like this, and you're asking me the most interesting questions, and I can tell that they're questions that you sincerely want to know the answer to.
Yes.
You're curious.
Yes.
And
right on the money.
Yeah. So could you talk to me about that? Have you always been like this, or did you make a decision that when you're photographing people, this is helpful in the process?
I have not always done it, but I realized it pretty early on. And there's 3 reasons I do it. When people come to be photographed, for the most part, they're apprehensive about it. Even actors come and they're used to being on camera, but they're not used to being photographed. So people are apprehensive. And if you talk to them about themselves, then that apprehension goes away. So that's the first reason. I want to have them feel comfortable about being photographed and think about something other than getting in their head about, if they look hot or whatever. And then the second reason is when in a portrait, gestures and expressions are what reveal something about the person. That's the soul of a good portrait, is gestures and expressions. And so if I want to make a picture that suggests something about that person, then paying attention to the way they move. Like right now as I'm talking, I'm using my hands. And if you can pay attention to that when you're photographing people, then the end result will be something that feels like them rather than just, here's what Randy looks like when he's wearing a brown shirt. And then the third reason, and this is what you said, is I am genuinely interested. I really am curious about people. And I guess, okay, so you could say curious or nosy. I'm probably both.
Nosy.
Those are two different things.
I think curious is much more flattering.
Yeah.
But nosy's more funny.
Well, I am really nosy too, but I've gotten better about realizing you can't just ask whatever you want. Like, you got to keep it on the rails.
Yeah. Well, and do you notice that with whoever your subject is, although calling them a subject makes it sound like
that's
some intangible thing. But anyway, it's a person, that you're connecting with.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've become pretty skilled at figuring out, like, how can I approach this conversation with this person?
Yes. And if I can figure out some stuff about them before they come, I always will Google their name, like, let's say it's an actor or a CEO that comes, I'll try to Google them and find out about them. So I have a jumping off point, and that's really helpful. And it's I think people also like that I've done a little research to figure out something about them.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I mean, you had the last time we were together, and first just check out Justine's Instagram. I'll put it in tell him what the handle is.
Justine Hackworth.
There you go.
And then my website is justinehackworth.com.
All right. It's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
So, and it's spelled like it sounds, but you'll be able to see what he's referring to, the reality in that. What I see when I look at your portraits, I see moments, I see movement, I see feeling.
Yeah.
And emotion. It's a snapshot.
Well, the last time you came, which hasn't been that long ago, there's one of the pictures of you. I thought we ended up with so much great stuff of you. But one of the pictures is your hands are kind of together and you're kind of leaning back in a laugh. Oh, it's one of my favorite pictures in the last few years. Like, I love it so much. It's got a little blur in it. It's not entirely sharp. So the blur shows, like, gives a sense of movement. And that laugh is how I think of you. Like, I just thought it was so great. I love how it ended up.
Well, thank you for that. When I got those and showed them to people, for me, I thought, wow, these are great photos. Like, these are great. And then when I showed them to my wife or my team at work, every one of them said, that is you.
Ah, very nice.
They said, that's what you're like. That's how you hold your hands. They saw my mannerisms and behavior in that. So that's how I love your description of the conversation. Loosens people up and brings out the way that they actually behave and move, and then you can capture reality instead of smile.
So that I guess there's a place for that, and that's how a lot of photographers do it. Is they have a way they want everyone to sit, and they learn these poses. But again, because gestures and expressions are what revealed someone, if you just have the same pose over and over, two things happen. Your pictures all start to look the same. And it also isn't about the subject. It's about the photographer. Like, hey, here's what I can do. And I just really like the kinds of pictures I like to take, and the ones I like to look at are a different approach to that.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you so much for listening to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. If you like what you're listening to, will you please hit that like, subscribe to this, and tell us what you like about it in the comments. That'll help us get great guests and keep this thing going. Now back to our interview. Well, can you tell me about that? And maybe you can even go back, is where this passion for the camera came from, and then what that experience has become and becoming.
Yeah. Well, I just had I wanted to take pictures. I think lots of people, most people have a varying degree of interest in taking pictures. It's really fun. And so I always liked it, but it wasn't until my last semester of college, and I was an English major. It wasn't until the last semester of college where I even took a class and started to pursue it heavily. So I took this class and I really liked it. But a beginning photography class, they just show you how to use a camera. They don't teach you how to take a good picture. So I'm looking at these pictures of mine and they're so dumb and so insipid. And then I would look at great photographers and I just had no idea how to go from where I was to something moving and remarkable. I'm going to move this.
Yeah. Those
like
things,
it's
you need to
slowing down.
crank that so hard to
Okay.
get it to stay put. Is it kind of slipping on you?
Feels like it is.
Yeah.
Oh, that's better.
There you go.
So I take a class and I didn't know where to go from there. But, over the years, I figured some stuff out. I started photography before there was YouTube. I think nowadays it's just really easy to be able to figure out an approach and to learn stuff. And I just had to figure it out on my own. I had a great mentor. I had to figure it out on my own. And I don't know where this compulsion comes from. That part I don't know. I don't get I feel like I'd rather be a writer, but I just don't have the same dedication to that as I have to photography. And I don't really know where that comes from, but I'm pretty driven. I really care about it. I want to get better every day. And I think about it constantly. And that hasn't changed in, 25 or 30 years.
Yeah. Well, there's two things you said that stand out to me. One is, I don't know where that comes from, where that compulsion comes from. I've been fascinated about the idea of interest. Like, where does somebody's interest in something come from? For example, I grow up and I am just completely interested in this type of music.
Yeah.
My parents never were. They never played that type of music ever in the house. But for some reason, to me, that is just like what captures me.
Yeah.
And then my brother, it's something else. It's like, well, we might as well, and this is just an example. You have two people in the same environment,
Yeah.
but their interests are so different. Well, where does that come from? And so your description, I don't have the answer for it. I just think it's a fascinating thing to wonder about.
Yeah.
And that you notice that you don't know is just amazing and curious and awesome to me.
I can think of an experience early on, but I just don't think this is what led to it. But, when I was a kid, my parents had photographs of our family and their life when, before I was born. And I was always really fascinated by those pictures. And I remember often sitting down and going through the albums and the shoebox and being captivated by it. And I would look at this picture of my parents when they were first married and I would think, who were those guys? Like, I want to know that version of my parents. And I would stare at that thinking that maybe somehow I would learn something about them through those images.
That's amazing. I think you and I might have talked about it when we were together last. There's something that I learned from Nate and Vanessa Quigley, who started the company called Chatbooks.
Yeah,
Look
I
up
love those guys.
Chatbooks. They're amazing. I love them.
Yeah, they're awesome.
And they, through a bunch of research and some partners, and they've been researching this thing called elaborative reminiscing. That there's a lot of research behind looking at photos, especially if you can do it together with others. But like you were pulling out the shoebox and looking through these photos,
Yeah.
it creates better connection and helps improve mental stability. Just so many other things. It helps people improve in their learning and relationships and so much simply from what they call elaborative reminiscing. And it's kind of this extension. I might say it now. I'm not the one who's done the research, nor have I researched the research, but this is Randy's version of it. I think about how much I like anticipation when I'm anticipating something wonderful that's coming, right? And I get to kind of live like, oh, we're going to Disneyland or we're going on this trip to Hawaii as a family. Yeah. And I get to be excited about it for an extended period of time. So it's not just the moment I'm there. I got to kind of live in the excitement of it, anticipating that this thing was coming, waiting for Christmas morning type of a thing. Well, I feel like this elaborative reminiscing is kind of an extension of that on the other end.
Yeah.
Where now, rather than the event being over and us being like, oh, like, man, I got to get home and go back to work now. It's like, no, we get to take those photos and relive that together. And then it makes it more concrete in our hearts. And oftentimes, you're waiting in Disneyland for a really long time and you're hot and you're hungry and your kids are whining and this and that. And so, but then the memory later might be of like, oh, how wonderful it was.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so if we get to share that time looking at these photos, and so you discovering a passion looking through the photos, and I want to know those people and know the story behind that, you're creating something wonderful and this new connection with some past experiences.
Man, that's pretty interesting. I want to know more. I'm gonna look that up because I'm really curious about that idea. And when I'm doing family pictures, lots of photographers just hand over digital files, and those are really useful and kind of what people expect. And we provide that as well. But I really have a focus on, my first inclination is to have them consider actual tangible prints. And we make a print that's different than a traditional photograph. It's ink on paper rather than a chemical process because it's far more stable. So they look beautiful and they last and last. And I think that's how I can provide the most value, is by making prints, because then their kids, their grandkids, and beyond are going to have an artifact from that time. So I think there's so much value in a printed piece.
And I have some of those from you.
Yeah,
they are
one in
beautiful.
the other room. It was nice to see that. Those kids are little. It's time to do it again.
It's time. Well, we will bring them in there. We want that. You said something earlier too about you had to learn a lot of this yourself. You had some mentors, but you had to figure stuff out. There wasn't YouTube, and I'm curious about that for you, where you only know your own experience, but you might have an opinion about it. About, now I can get on YouTube and someone can tell me, well, this is how you do the camera and this is how you do the lighting and this is how you frame a good shot. What would you change? If you could, would you change it? Or do you say, or is it that the experience I had is?
Yeah, I had a pretty good experience. I want to tell you how I came to finding my mentor, because this was a pretty transformative time. Can I tell you that?
Yeah, please.
I'm living in Salt Lake. I'm trying to shoot. I had a friend named Aaron Call who was incredible. He worked at a lab and he was helping me figure stuff out. But, he really liked landscapes and I was more interested in portraits. So there was an event. In Salt Lake one night. And because he worked at this photo lab, he was able to go to this event. He had access to this thing where a new film from Kodak was coming out and photographers were going to talk about it and they were going to hand out some free film. So he said, hey, do you want to come to this? We'll get some free film. And I didn't know anything about it, but I heard free film and I thought, let's go. So it's at the studio of a photographer named Kent Miles, and he had his images on the wall. And I walk in and I just was blown away. Like, I got shivers. I'd never seen pictures like that. I just didn't know photography could do that or say that or mean that. And it just spoke to me so deeply and it really resonated. And I thought, well, this is what I have to do. I have to not be Kent Miles, but I have to figure out, how can I make pictures that stir something in people? Like, that when they see a picture, they're moved in the same way I am right now looking at these pictures. So at the end of that night, I met him and we talked. And so over the course of a little while, he did become a mentor of mine. And I met with him for many, many, many years. Even after I was married, even after I was a working photographer, and I still really respect his opinion, and I'll still text him. And he's not just a great photographer, he's just such a great person. And he's an artist, and he's a very good teacher, and he's just an amazing human. And I think, if you're a boring person, you'll make boring pictures. There's no way around it. And he's just such an interesting guy. And then he has this artistic voice that is really clear and loud and beautiful. So that was an incredible thing. But I walked into that studio. I didn't know that was the diversion in my life. I didn't know I was going to be a working photographer. I just was really interested as a not hobby, maybe a vocation. Like I was very serious about it, but I didn't intend to do it as a job. And then running into him, I was like, whoa, I got some work to do here. I got to figure this stuff out. He's the guy to show me. But I still wasn't planning on being a photographer for work.
And how did he become a mentor to you from that pivot point that you felt?
Well, first thing he suggested is that I take a class he was teaching at Salt Lake Community College, or no, the Salt Lake Art Center. I don't even know if that still exists, but he said, take this class at Salt Lake Art Center. So I did. And then I took another one. And after those two, I said, that's not enough. I need more. And he said, okay, well, what you should do, instead of just me and you meeting, why don't you gather some other students that are like-minded and are interested in the same way? And let's all gather together, maybe 4 or 5 people. And that way you get to learn from each other and not just from me. And so I found some people, there were about 4 of us, and we would meet once every other week. And then it went to once a month, and we would bring our pictures, and he would, we would all talk about them, what's working, what's not. And then he'd give us an assignment for the next time. And I met with that group for many years, and it still exists. I don't go, but that group still exists. One time we had a group exhibit, and at the time there were 7 people in the group. And so we needed a name for this exhibit. Since there were 7 of us, we named the group the Salt Lake 7, and it still exists. People are still meeting with Kent. I don't get a chance to go very often anymore, but I did for many, many years.
Wow, there's so much awesomeness in that story. Well, I mean, how amazing that a mentor, one, wants to pay it forward.
Yeah.
And help somebody, a young kid coming along, and cares enough to do that. I mean, that says a lot about him. I mean, you describe him as awesome, then he does that. But then the wisdom in saying, well, let's not do a one-on-one. Let's bring other people. That collaboration and the sharing and the differences. I have several groups that I get together that are like that, where and they're all a little bit different, but maybe 3 or 4 different groups for different things. And that's changed my life. People who want to lean in and elevate themselves, and other people can help us along the way. There were C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, and I can't remember who else was part of a group. They had groups that they would get together, and when they're writing Lord of the Rings and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and his Chronicles of Narnia, they helped each other create these worlds because they're encouraging and each other along the way and teaching and learning from each other. So the concept is amazing, and that somebody would help you assemble something like that.
Oh yeah, I mean,
life-changing.
It was so much better than going to college. Like if I'd studied photography in college, I got so much better of a training and education from him. And I mean, I just totally lucked out. I just walked in that day, and I mean, what if that kid hadn't said, let's go to this thing? Or what if he hadn't been invited? Or, I mean, I was led to him for sure. And that thing, that really innocuous meeting of walking in a studio totally changed my life. In fact, I have 3 kids, and one of them we named after Kent Miles. We named him Miles because he's such a significant part of my life. And so we named a kid as sort of I always liked the name Miles anyway, but for sure a nod to Kent Miles.
That is a beautiful thing, and I'm glad you liked the name.
Well, if he had a dumb name, we wouldn't have. I don't want to say a dumb name example because then maybe someone's
a dumb name like Randy.
Is your name Randall?
My name is Randall. Randall Greer Sparks, Greer. And
Greer.
Yeah, I don't know where that name came from. I've heard lots of last names Greer.
Yeah, there were some Greers in my town.
And as a child, and especially maybe in my junior high years, I always thought that's a weird name. It's a dumb name. I don't like my middle name. I want to change my middle name. Those feelings like that.
Yeah.
Well, here's the story. It's my dad's middle name and my grandfather's middle name. And I have that middle name. I hold it so dear. And it's my oldest son's middle name.
I was going to ask.
That's going to make me cry.
Oh,
but that I get
that's meaningful
to hand that to them.
Yeah.
And the name that I annoyed me. I'm like, what kind of name is Greer?
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that I have a son that I could give that to.
It's pretty cool. And how does he feel about it? Have you told him that history and why it's his
well,
name?
he at least that I've heard, he's never complained about it. But he's the sweetest kid. He's 17. He's just the sweetest kid. Maxwell Greer. And
Maxwell Greer Sparks. That's such a cool name. It sounds like a high-end furniture company.
well, maybe we ought to go turn him onto that. It's like, you know what, you could make it big.
Yeah.
He's got time. Hey, something that I'd love to know about you is you're looking through the lens.
Yeah.
You're talking to people. You're bringing out their gestures and their personalities. What have you learned from people during these interesting conversations and photographing them? How has that changed you?
Well, I would say that one thing I've learned is that we're all the same. We're all the same. People are the same. Here's kind of an interesting story. Last year, my son and I went for a drive in the mountains, and we got stuck in the snow. We're pretty high up elevation-wise, and we got stuck. And we were on a dirt road. There was no one around. And after we got out, actually, I clocked it on my odometer, and the next closest person was 6 miles down the road. So we're in the snow, we can't get out. And about 10 minutes after we were there, some guys came by on like a Razor or one of those, off-road things. And they were so helpful immediately. As soon as they saw someone in need, they jumped up and helped us. And on their Razor, they have some bumper stickers that suggested that they and me are on opposite ends of a political spectrum. Like whatever they were advertising, I would never. And so we're very different. Now, if that guy and I met at a rally, we'd be yelling at each other. But not then, because who cares? There's a guy who needs help. I'm going to go help him. I was so grateful for those guys. Another thing, a similar thing, like around that same time, we were camping somewhere, and a person who I would identify as opposite of my political sense, and he came by and saw we were building a fire, and he said, "Hey, man, I got a bunch of wood over here that I'm not going to use. Let me just bring it over." I mean, he was so kind and so giving. Anyway, so that's a thing I've learned as photographing people, is that we're all the same. We're closer. We're way closer we're way more similar than we are dissimilar. But there's a lot of fighting, like with politics for sure. There's a lot of fighting and anger and you're wrong, I'm right. But, when you come to the studio, we're all pretty similar.
Yeah, and interesting.
And everyone has a great story to tell, for sure. So, I mean, you early on, you asked if I'd always done this approach where I'm asking questions. I think it evolved. I figured it out over time. And it has turned out that that's part of, I love the photography part, but I love the interaction. I just love it so much. When you came, I was mad we had to finish. I loved being able to talk to you. And honestly, I could have done that all day. We had an hour, whatever it was. And I thought, well, that was just not long enough. That ended too soon because you were so great. I love your insight and your life. And so that's a pretty cool thing about what I do is I get to meet people and ask them questions, and people will reveal stuff and tell me things, and it's pretty fun.
Well, and to me, you make people feel comfortable. You facilitate that. Feel comfortable. You're so approachable. You're sincere and curious. I think that invites people being open.
Yeah.
And then once people can crack open and talk about what they really care about, what's really meaningful to them, now they're real. I love that. And you asked me questions that made me think. What am I reading? What have I read lately? And tell me about it. What have you learned from it? And then that spawned something in you. In fact, I'd love to hear the story. You said, well, I read this book and I went on this trip to Hawaii. Could you tell that story? Yeah, I love this.
Okay, so we went to Hawaii, and when I got there, I thought, well, I went for work. But we added extra time. So my wife got to come, and as soon as we got there, we had the wedding. We got that out of the way. So we're there to shoot, and the next day is like the family party dinner, and then the day after that is the wedding itself. And then we stuck around after that. As soon as I got there, I just, it was my first time in Hawaii, and I realized that it was a pretty short time. It was a week, but like this is going to go by so fast. and I want to just be here present. I don't want to squander my time here. One time I went to Mexico City for work, but I had some time and I ruined it by worrying so much about, should I do my time? Should I go to the museum or should I go to a ruin site? Like I'm so in my head about what to do that I kind of ruined it. So when I got to Hawaii, I thought, it doesn't matter what I do here. Just being here with Amy is the thing. So whatever she wants to do, I'll just go along with it. I'm just gonna be present. And I that's sort of cliche, but I've never really got what that means when people say be in the moment. But I tried to do that. And so whatever she wanted to do, I did. And I didn't let any kind of thing creep up and annoy me, which that's rare, man. I just get ticked off so easy. So I thought, why would I do that? It's going to ruin my trip. So I'm just going to be happy I'm here and that's it. Well, it was an amazing trip. It was incredible. And in fact, I bought this bracelet because this is a memory. I wanted to anchor those feelings in and take that attitude, that approach of not letting everyday things get in my way of joy. So it was pretty cool. But right when I got home, like the day I got home, for some reason I came across a book on Amazon called Don't Believe Everything You Think. And I bought it and I started reading it that night. It's short. I probably finished it that night or the next day. And in it explained what just happened to me. This idea that just because you have a thought, it doesn't mean it's real. And you don't have to believe everything you think. So anyway, it was such a cool experience. And I love that book. I just recently listened to it again. And I think I'll probably just every year I'll reread that because you forget, you know what I mean? Like you have these experiences and you're like, I'll never yell at my kids again. And then 10 minutes later and there's crap all over the floor and you're like, who did this? So you gotta form a new habit. So I don't always feel the way I did then. It takes some remembering and practice. And anyway, thanks for asking about that because that was a pretty cool moment and I liked it and I like being reminded of it.
Yeah, well, I liked it too. I have that book. But I think Joseph Nguyen, is maybe who wrote it. So it's a small book, white, kind of like got a line drawing kind of cover on it.
Yeah.
I think. And I would love to have him on the podcast someday.
Oh yeah, you totally should.
Joseph,
I think he's easy to get to.
And I maybe even, I might have even already sent him an invite. I'm going to do it again.
Well, have you read it?
I've read it.
And did you like it?
I did. I love it. And I love the concept. And I've read the ideas that this is promoting in other psychology books and so on. It's so important because we have thoughts come in our heads. We have feelings, we have emotions. But when we can remove ourselves back from that and, it's metacognition, thinking about what we're thinking.
Yes. And, he didn't, this isn't an idea that he developed and came up with, but it was just timing. Like it was just such nice timing. And the way he wrote about it just really made an impact at the time I read it. And I think, I've recommended it to other people and no one's ever called me back and said, this was life-changing. So maybe it doesn't have the same impact. I just think it was timing. Like if I had read that a year before, I think I would have been like, that's really nice. And I ought to do that and let it stay there.
Isn't it funny when your heart or your is cracked open?
Yeah.
Right at that moment when the thing can be like, like shot in there and you're like, oh, it hit me now. Like I've had people or books, teach me truth over and over and over in my life. And it's just bouncing off ping, ping, ping. And then I hear it when I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just had this most amazing insight, like this thing that I learned. And and then later I realized I'm like, oh, people have been trying to teach me that my whole life. But I never understood it. But
it's all about timing. It's all about timing and also the way it's said.
That's it.
One example is I just really like Tony Robbins. I love the things he said. I remember before I was married reading Awaken The Giant Within. That just makes so much sense to me. And I try to tell Amy to read it or listen. And, it's not the voice that works for her. But then she listens to Brooke Castillo, a life coach trainer, and she's saying the same thing, but in a different way with different language. And Amy hears that and she's like, oh yeah, this is so important. So it's timing and the way it's said.
Yeah, I love the language, the messenger. Kathy and I do that. For a long time, we've tried to, whatever she's reading, I read it too. And so that, we can, in part, so that we have the same words, the language that we can use with each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've done it where I ask her, I'm like, will you read this book? So that when I try to explain my thoughts and feelings, and we'll do this with each other, that you'll know where this language is coming from, and we'll be able to understand each other.
Yeah.
She might learn the lesson from a different book with different language that maybe I'll read, and then, but if we're able to read that, maybe it won't be the one that gives me the epiphany that it gave her. I'll get the epiphany by reading, Tony Robbins, and she'll get it by reading someone else. But when we gain that lesson, now we can at least use the same language when we talk to each other.
That's so cool that you read them together. There are 3 books I have begged Amy to read over the years, and she has books she's wanting me to read, but Confederacy of Dunces, A Perfect Storm, and American Kingpin. I'm dying for her to read those books so we can talk about them. Have you read American Kingpin?
No, but you are like the 10th person that's told me about it. So I'm going to add it to the list of 100 books.
I know. Everyone already has a stack of books. I saw this cartoon that had, like, it was quantifying how high buildings are, like Sears Tower, World Trade Towers. My stack of books I need to read. And it was twice as tall as all that.
That's funny. This is so fun. I'd like to know, you've talked about people that have impacted you and lessons that you've learned, and learning that we're all the same.
Yeah.
And people are just people that have emotions and feelings and that are willing to help. We have interesting stories. What has being a photographer and interacting with people taught you about gratitude?
I think of gratitude as an awareness. It's a frame of mind, right? It's a frame of mind. It's a way of seeing, and you have to be conscious of it. You have to deliberately choose those kinds of things. And I think as a photographer, a good photographer is someone who notices things that others might not. You say, hey, I'm going to direct your attention to this important element. And so it's the same: noticing, paying attention, being deliberate, and being grateful is noticing, paying attention, being deliberate, and focusing on a certain thing.
I love that. I had someone on the podcast who talked about, I think, quoting somebody else, and I don't remember who, but it's on another podcast, that an artist is a professional noticer.
Ooh.
Artists are professional noticers.
Yeah, I like that.
And you did that, but you said 3 things that it wasn't, you're aware, you notice. What were those 3 things you just said again?
Being deliberate and paying attention, and some other insightful word.
There you go. It's on video. We got it.
Yeah, I don't remember. But artist is a professional noticer. That's really great. And I have said that I get paid to see a similar thing. I get paid to see.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're good at seeing. I love that. And so here's one I thought. So is there anything that you can think of, experiences in your life that were really challenging?
Nice mug, by the way.
You like the mug? There. Thank you. I tried to choose something that looks nice.
Oh, it's very cool and heavy. Okay, challenges in my life.
So have you gone through anything difficult?
Yeah, of course.
For which you're now grateful?
Yeah.
Anything you want to talk about?
That's such a great question, because on my way here, as I was thinking about gratitude and the whole topic of this thing, by the way, this is so perfect for you. I feel like you're the right guy to be doing this thing. I'm so glad you're doing this podcast. It's very cool. So when I was driving here and I was thinking about gratitude, the easy ones are low-hanging fruit of things that are like good, like positive things. Like, it's a beautiful day. I'm so thankful that we have the view of these mountains, and that I'm healthy. Okay, so to answer your question, yes, here is kind of a slug to the gut that I'm so grateful for. I'm going to try to go fast through this. But when I was in college, I got a job in a parking booth. And it was a great job. I was an English major, like I said. It was a great job because I could go there and read and write. And English majors, that's what you do, is you write a ton. Was your undergraduate English?
No, it was Latin American Studies.
Okay. So you probably had a ton of
A
writing and
ton
reading.
of reading and language and stuff,
Yeah.
but it wasn't English.
So in English, your English major, you write a ton, read a ton. And the booth was perfect. I could go there and get all that done. Well, at some point, the manager quit. And so they asked if I wanted to manage these lots. And it was great in one way because, I had a regular salary and, insurance and all that. But then when I graduated from college, I stayed there for a little while. And this was during that time that I was really starting to ramp up photography, like figure it out. And I devoted all my time. This is great. I only had to work 4 hours a day in the booth, but I was getting paid, 8 hour for an 8 hour day. So it gave me so much time to work on photography. And there was another guy who worked in the booth. He had the shift before me. And when I would come to the booth, I would show him these books that I had checked out of photographers, and I would show him the prints that I had just made in the dark room the night before. And he was such a great friend in that he was really interested and encouraging. And he wanted to know about the photographers and why do you like this one? And tell me about this picture. What do you think this means? And so he was really encouraging. And one day, and he knew I wanted to be a photographer. And at this point now, I'm like, okay, I want to do photography as a way to make a living. So he was aware of that. And one of the photographers I told him about was a guy named Chris Buck, who was, I liked him then and I still do. He's still a working photographer, advertising, editorial. And so one time this kid in the booth, Brian, said to me, "Hey, what do you think Chris Buck did today?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't have any idea." And he said, "Well, I don't know either, but I bet he didn't work in a parking booth." And
Oh,
it was a real slug to the gut, but it was a great wake up. It was a great wake up. I think Brian was tired of hearing me talk about doing stuff and to mention everyone else, but not me, and not talk about what I was doing. And, we have the life we focus on, right? And he was saying, "What kind of life do you want? Do you want a parking booth lot or parking booth life? Or do you want something else?"
yeah.
And it was painful. It was so painful, that awareness. But my gosh, I'm glad he said it. So anyway, to answer your question, there's a painful thing that I'm so grateful for.
Yeah. Well, and of course that's painful because it's true. And,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh yeah, I got to do I want this or not?
Yes, yes. And it was shortly after that, then I realized, okay, I got to quit and start doing what photographers do. And it was scary and it was really hard, but it was necessary. And it would have happened anyway. But who knows how long I would have dragged on at that place.
Yeah. Now you can look backwards and kind of connect those dots and say, wow, that was a point
Yeah.
of change. And sometimes those are painful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. Well, have you had a chance to pay it forward? You had so many people that, mentors and friends around. How are you able to pay that forward?
For a few years, I taught a class at UVU,
Yeah.
and I loved it. And it was the business of photography class. One of the things that happens when you go, study art at a university is you just do the art, and then you leave a school and you don't know any of the business side. So when they asked me if I wanted to teach a class, I thought, well, I should create the class I wish I had had. And so it was, how to be a working portrait and wedding photographer. I did that for a few years and I loved it. I've had workshops. In fact, the first time I did a portrait workshop, your wife, Kathy, was there.
Yep, she did. And she loved it. She learned so much. She loved it so much.
Oh, good. That's
so
good.
we were so happy you did that. And she said, and it was, she didn't care what it cost, when it was. We just said, we need to make this work because we liked you so much and thought that would be something that would elevate our life.
Well, I'm glad she was there.
And it did. And in fact, the skills that she learned there have, she uses them still.
Awesome.
And we're so grateful for that. Although,
very nice.
I'm still trying to figure all this out with filming, a podcast. I didn't take your class, and so I don't have the eye for that. But
well, you've nailed it. And
yeah.
I hope this whole time I've been framing you up here, and this is a good, the light on your face is so perfect right now. I like how you have this highlight side with a little bit of shadow, and that shadow side gives, if it was a picture, it gives this 2D object, a 3D feel. And anyway, so I've been paying attention.
Now that's taking us back to YouTube. So I know that a photographer, you're seeing things through, your lens, and YouTube told me to do the lighting that way. So.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's nice. I love it. Really. See, it looks great in here.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful for you. So grateful we got to spend this time together. And I'm so grateful for the impact that you've made on me and my family.
Well, thank you.
But also, I can only imagine the impact that you've made on so many other individuals and families when you photograph them, because the experience that they have with you, with your curiosity and interest and opening them up, but then also giving them such wonderful living moments in these photographs that they can reminisce over afterwards. It's amazing. Again, everybody, please check out Justine Hackworth on Instagram, justinehackworth.com, and you will see what I'm talking about. It's beautiful. Justin, I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.
The world is better because you are part of it.
Oh, man, Randy, that's how I feel about you too.
Well, thanks. One day we'll do this again, and I'll bring the family over to have some photographs. But
very good.
Until next time, thank you for listening, everyone.